This is indeed the title of my talk. I will talk to you about network music performance. I know it is not really directly related to ethnomusicological archiving, but it does relate to musicians from different cultures to communicate and collaborate during music performance. Telecommunications, as you know, are invading our lives in every form of daily activity, including music collaboration. And so it is expected that soon network technologies and network communications will have a significant impact on the evolution of music, including folk and traditional music. So basically, in this talk, I will attempt to give you an overview of challenges and achievements in the research area of network music performance. And then I will present you our work in Crete, where our department is located. And I will present you one of our experiments, which is on the traditional music of Crete. So you will have the opportunity to listen a little bit of that music also. So network music performance is defined as the possibility of musicians to synchronously collaborate from distance using computer networks. Since its inception, it was not intended as a replacement of conventional co-located music performance, but rather it was used as a telecommunication approach in cases where it was not possible for musicians to meet together due to traveling, for example. That was one of the possibilities. And the other possibility was to use network music performance for more experimental music as a new music practice. So, it was used not only for avant-garde music, such as electroacoustic music, but also for new experiments such as outdoor performances. Network music performance today is an interdisciplinary research field as it involves several aesthetic, technical, and perceptual aspects. Although the history of network music performance officially seems to begin around the 70s, as that was when the first experiments on remote music collaboration happened. However, realistic network music performance, bidirectional, at the same time network music performance, was only made possible around 2001 when the Internet 2 network, academic network infrastructure appeared in the United States. So it is since then it is only feasible in really good and reliable network infrastructures. One such network is a local area network where you don't have losses, for example, over the network. And the other networks where you can do network music performance is the academic networks. So the Internet 2 and the European GIANT. Also, in the remaining types of networks, for example, in domestic networks, other commonly used networks, they do network music performance, but for more avant-garde music. So basically, it's still not a common practice to play music over the network. And this is due to several technical constraints that make it very difficult to overcome perceptual issues that are inherent to music performance. So music performance, for example, unlike speech interaction, which is the common practice in telecommunication, in video conferencing, so music, unlike speech, requires very high quality audio, uninterrupted audio communication, and also very low latency of communication. For example, speech is acceptable at a data rate of 64 kilobits per second, while monophonic CD quality audio corresponds to approximately more than 10 times that data rate. Also in music, if you lose segments of your signal, then that would correspond to an audio dropout, which can be devastated in music performance setup. Because imagine, for example, if you play percussive music and you occasionally miss the attack parts of your instruments. And of course, the most important obstacle in network music performance has to do with latency. So there are several studies that show which is the latency that can be tolerated in remote communication. And for example, in speech interaction is acceptable at 150 milliseconds, while it is impossible to perform music with a latency above around 30 milliseconds. This threshold is called the ensemble performance threshold, and it is basically the main problem of network music performance. So audio quality means you need a lot of network bandwidth, so you need a constant line of upload and download speed. Your network should not have losses, so you are not supposed to lose any part of your signals. And low latency is not only caused because of network paths or geographical distance, but also due to buffering audio or processing audio. So for example, it is this very, very low latency threshold is prohibitive for applying any audio compression. It's only recently that people have attempted to use the Opus codec, if you ever heard about it, which has a very, very small processing delay. And I will show you some experiment on that later. So despite these strict technical constraints, it is possible to have music collaboration over the network depending on the circumstances, depending on the scenarios. So for example, like a lot of you said at their presentations, usually in the context of a music lesson, for example, it's like the teacher will perform and afterwards the student will perform. So it's very rare that teacher and student will perform at the same time. So in that case, the communication is not bidirectional, at least at the same time. Or there are other scenarios. For example, a stage performance transmission to a remote audience is common practice today. We call it live streaming. This does not have strict requirements in terms of latency because the audience can tolerate latency. The interaction is not bidirectional. And then another scenario which may be more relevant to ethnomusicology is doing a remote recording your music to a remote studio. In that case, you need a high quality link, a high bandwidth link, but you don't care so much about latency issues. So network music performance can be done under certain circumstances. And this is a very old diagram we made back in 2006 and to classify the different scenarios for network music performance and study the related requirements. So in our department in Crete, we've been working on this field since 2006 when we received our first grant, which was just about the time when they started doing network music performance in the United States, for example. So this is a really new field. And the very first funding we received was for a project called the AMUSES, where we developed a comprehensive system for network music performance, although we identified the technical constraints. We did not use any compression at that time, but we said, okay, let's assume that we can have the ideal network. What would we do to allow musicians to collaborate? And so we focused, for example, on implementing a social network for musicians, where musicians would be able to go and register their profile and meet with each other. They had a calendar to schedule their network meetings and so on. And then we developed interfaces such as this one, for example, where you have live video feeds and audio feeds, and you can control the levels, or you can have a metronome to synchronize from distance. And that was a work that was concluded in 2008. And then again, we received funding in 2012 when the Opus codec, the one I mentioned before, was widely used in voice over IP technologies. So there we adopted a completely different solution. We said, let's start from an existing excuse me, a voice over IP solution, something like a Skype, an open source solution, and modify it for the purposes of music. And that's what we did. So we have a software which is similar to Skype. It's not Skype, of course. Skype is proprietary at the moment. And then we performed some other experiments with this software. So we've been doing network music performances, experiments, evaluation experiments since 2007, when we had our first prototype systems. Over different networks. For example, in DSL networks, we had so much packet loss that it was impossible to communicate. So in the second system, when we had video conferencing facilities, we did an experiment with the traditional music of Crete. It was on a local area network to avoid signal distortion, because we knew that musicians wouldn't be willing to collaborate with such distortion. And so I would like to present some video experts of that experiment, which I hope will give an idea of what it is to play from different locations. Yes. Before that, I would like to say that, of course, we used the compression, audio compression. We had 3 professional musicians playing 3 traditional music of Crete, that is the lira, mandolin, and, well, you know mandolin. And lauto is like a Cretan lute. And we asked them to perform in different tempi to check whether they could synchronize. Before separating the musicians, we asked them to perform in the same room and warm up a little bit. So I will first show you this video. Okay, I'll move on. And then we asked them to move to 3 different buildings within our department. The communication was achieved through the server. Each arrow here shows 1 audio and 1 video stream. So each of the musicians was sending 2 streams to the server, 1 audio and 1 video, and was receiving another 2 pair of streams. They used the user interface like this, which is something we developed in the context of the project. And this is the video where you can see how it felt to be separated. They use speech signals to communicate instead of expressions. This is what this musician was sending to the network. And this is the, sorry. I cannot show it from the, I have some technical problem here, but okay, we will fix it. And this is what this musician was receiving from the network on his headphones. Okay, so I'll try to get that back. I'm sorry about this. Okay. And so we took several measurements from these experiments to measure latency, bandwidth requirements, and so on. The latency we measured, the average measured latency was 8.7 milliseconds for audio and 9.3 milliseconds for video. This was due to, not so much due to the network, but mostly due to the compression that was used, the Opus codec. In terms of bandwidth, the consumption was 18 kilobits per second for audio and 83 for video, the upload, and the download is 2 times that bandwidth, so approximately 200 kilobps. And we had no zero packet loss, so no distortions in the signal, and that is because we did the experiment in a local area network. And in terms of the experience of musicians, we interviewed them after the experiment, and we asked them to fill in some questionnaires. And so we found out that the most difficult, the issue that they found most difficult was to maintain a steady tempo. This was especially more difficult in fast and slow tempi. They said, they reported that they could more easily communicate in a moderate tempo. And the other problems was they had some synchronization problems, and they reported that they could perceive the latency, 8 milliseconds. The other things is that they didn't seem to have, they were able to communicate with speech instead of visual cues that they normally use in a conventional music performance. And in terms of musical expression, one of them had a serious problem, the one that was less familiar to technology anyway, and he reported that if you use technology in folk music, it limits so much your freedom that you are not free to express yourself. He also mentioned that he found it very difficult, very uncomfortable with the levels, the fact that with the levels that he was receiving on his headphones, the levels of the other 2 musicians. And so, as a conclusion, okay, we had a satisfactory experiment in local area network, but the truth is that NMP technology is not mature enough for folk music, for traditional music. First of all, because in a different network, in a commonly used network, latency and loss and data loss would cause serious problems in the collaboration of musicians. It seems that co-presence is crucial to music expression and that musicians felt uncomfortable. However, these musicians, they said that they found it very interesting and they would be willing to adapt to this setup. And they were particularly interested in the possibility of using our software to teach students, to teach expats. You know, we have immigration is a large phenomenon in Greece, especially recently. So they found it very, very useful for teaching traditional music abroad. And yes, that's more or less what I wanted to say about the experiment. I will try to outline a little bit my personal interest in this. The last few years since I started the collaboration with the University of Hamburg, I've been trying to make use of machine listening techniques of artificial intelligence, so to say, in network music performance system. For example, to predict the performance of musicians so as to cope with latency problems. And other things I do is I'm trying to replicate the performance of remote musicians by means of computer accompaniment, and also to exploit functionalities such as score following, which would make, I believe, would make collaboration, distant collaboration, more easy. That's more or less what I wanted to tell you. Here are some of my publications. One of this is the dissertation, my dissertation, which you can find online at the library of the University of Hamburg. And of course, I would like to thank very much my supervisor for inviting me here. Thank you very much.